There are some unique aspects of communication breakdown if you're living with acquired brain injury that involve things like tone of voice, facial expression. Sometimes after a brain injury, the muscles of the face may be affected and people may not have the same range of facial expression. And it's important to keep in mind that communication is more than just words. It's facial expression, body language, tone of voice. If in fact the speaker is a person with a brain injury and those aspects of communication have been impaired because of the injury, the way that they say something may not match how they feel about what they're saying.
There is always hope, and you are not alone.
Welcome to Hope Survives, a podcast from the Hope Survives nonprofit supporting individuals and families navigating life with brain injury. I'm your host, Cristabelle Braden. After my own experience with traumatic brain injury, including multiple re-injuries, I've learned how isolating this road can feel and how hard it can be to find a way forward. No one should have to walk it alone. On this show, we explore the realities of life with brain injury through encouragement, thoughtful conversations, expert insights, and real stories. No matter where you are on your journey, remember, you're never alone, and hope survives.
With a little hope, you can make it through today. With a little faith, someday you'll get through the pain. Just a little love is enough to light the way through your darkest night. Hope survives, a little faith and a little love. Hope survives, a little faith and a little love. Hope survives.
Hello, friend. Welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. So glad you are tuning in today. We've got a great episode coming up about communication. Communication breakdown is one of the most common and painful challenges that families experience after brain injury. And so today we're going to talk about why these breakdowns happen and what you can do to prevent or minimize them in daily life. Through my own journey with brain injury, communication has been a big challenge, especially when I first had my injury. I struggled a lot with word finding, overstimulation, not being able to say what I wanted to say, not to mention emotional dysregulation, executive functioning, and even memory loss can impact communication. So today we've got an expert in the field, which I'm very excited to share with you. Roberta Brooks is here today. She is a speech language pathologist that has worked with people with brain injury for over 40 years. So her entire career has been in brain injury. She's retired as a SLP, and she has her current certified brain injury specialist, CBIS. She has over 40 years of experience in evaluation and treatment of adults with communication challenges resulting from acquired brain injury. Her work has spanned the full range of healthcare, from acute care to community reentry programs, and she's presented at national, state, and local conferences on topics of the evaluation and treatment of aphasia and cognitive communication disorders. Since she's retired from her full-time work as a speech-language pathologist, she's actually continued her involvement through her work with the Neuro Resource Facilitation Program of the Brain Injury Association of Pennsylvania and as a supporter of several grassroots organizations. So this is someone who's dedicated their entire life and career to brain injury. Even when the field was relatively new, she was pioneering this field, I would say. I really admire and respect Roberta. And she recently did a workshop for us here at Hope Survives that was very well received. So I'm very excited to share this episode with you. But before we get into the conversation with Roberta, we have a podcast spotlight with Dr. Ryan Harvey from the Functional Neurology Center. He is going to talk about communication styles and why that's important. So, Dr. Harvey.
So now we're going to talk about different communication styles and how that can be really helpful for you to be able to communicate about your injury, not only to, maybe your providers, but also to people in your life, right? I think a really important concept when it comes to communication after a brain injury is knowing that some patients deal with things in different ways, right? And certain things, again, are things you're not going to be able to see in a patient in terms of what areas of their brain are affected, right? So we'd say, oh, well, everything looks good on my scans. Like, how would I tell a patient where it's like, rather than getting frustrated with people in your life for not understanding how you feel, is trying to help them understand what kind of things can they be able to do to help you in your recovery, right? And so I think that, trying to meet someone with these types of statements of like, I'm experiencing this, and this is what I'd like you to be a part of is really, really important, right? How do you create a safe setting for you to be able to communicate about what you're experiencing and what you need from the people in your life is really, really important to you to be able to find, tools and be able to handle those types of interactions, right? Because it's easy to become frustrated with the people in your life for not understanding how you feel the way you feel. But in most situations, these people want to be helpful. They just don't know how to be helpful, right? And so a clear, concise form of communication with the people in your life is really important. Being able to meet people where they're at, the same way they need to be able to meet you where you're at, right? So if a person right away is saying, "Oh, like I'm not willing to listen to what you're saying," then you have to take a step back and say, "How can I communicate with them in a way that's more approachable?" And understanding where they're coming from too, right? Because the education system of head injury has been broken for so long. People don't understand that head injury is a lasting problem. People don't understand that head injury is still prevalent and still life changing, even if all the scans are normal, right? And so, consistently educating people in your life about what you're dealing with and the resources out there and what are the things that you need to focus on to help put yourself in the best situation to heal is all about empowerment. Communicating, how do you want to feel empowered rather than just trying to educate people only about what is brain injury or what is concussion, which is still valuable, but there is a place for everything. And I think that trying to empower people to be able to help where they can help and understand where they can understand, rather than trying to steamroll everyone and saying, this is the problem and this is the issue. And then I need this or that. I think meeting people where they're at and their understanding is really important for you to be able to get more resources and more tools for yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey, for sharing all of that with us. The Functional Neurology Center is a sponsor of Hope Survives, and they truly believe in helping families and people who are going through brain injury. And we're so grateful for their support of our nonprofit and this podcast. The FNC offers personalized neuro recovery programs for anyone going through brain injury and a wide range of neurological conditions. When you trust your brain to the team at the Functional Neurology Center, they take the time to get to know the whole you so they can personalize your recovery program for your unique and complex condition. There's hope for a better tomorrow, and the FNC is committed to helping you get back to what matters most. Visit thefnc.com for more. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of Hope Survives. We have a lot of workshops, programs, and so many things happening. So make sure to check us out at hopesurvives.org. And let's get into today's conversation, what you're really here for: communication, breakdown, strategies, and encouragement with Roberta Brooks. I'm here today with Roberta Brooks. And Roberta, I am so excited to welcome you to Hope Survives podcast. Thank you for taking this time with us today.
Oh, you're more than welcome, Cristabelle, and I'm very excited to be here and to talk about this subject. So thank you for inviting me.
Of course, we're so excited to have you. I met Roberta through the Brain Injury Association of Pennsylvania, where she is an incredible resource as a neuro resource facilitator, as well as just helping the brain injury community in so many ways. And so last year at the annual conference, I went to a presentation you did on communication, and I thought to myself, this is so beautiful. This is so clear. This is so laid out. I need to invite her to Hope Survives to talk about communication. And so we have a workshop with you as well as this podcast. And I'm just so thrilled. Thank you for saying yes and for coming and being part of this. So to start, can you introduce yourself, how you got into speech language pathology, how you got into working with brain injury, and a bit of your background?
I'm happy to do that. And again, so excited to be here. I sort of fell into speech language pathology. My original background was in music and theater. And wanted, I've always loved the arts and I've always loved language. And at the point where I decided I needed something that was a little bit more stable, a roommate said, you should look into speech language pathology. And it turned out to be a really good fit. It's been a career that has served me well for over 40 years. I got into it primarily because of the love of language. And what that led to was just an overwhelming love of and amazement at and awe of what our brains do. And that really led me to working with acquired brain injury, both stroke and traumatic brain injury. It's an amazing thing to work with people, see their resilience, their humor, and just the fortitude of people faced with what I consider the hardest job anyone will ever have, is coming back from a brain injury. So I am in awe of organizations like yours, as well as what the Brain Injury Association of Pennsylvania does and BIAA. It's an amazing group of folks to be a part of. When I retired from speech language pathology, the opportunity to become a neuro resource facilitator sort of came to me, and that's also been a very meaningful experience, and I appreciate the opportunity to share information about communication.
So, can you explain what neuro resource facilitation is for those who may not be familiar with that program?
Certainly. It's a resource navigation service. It's healthcare navigation. One of the things that I appreciate more and more these days is that language itself can be confusing. And so I think of it sort of as we serve as a flashlight to sort of help people find a path where it's very much person-centered, so that when we meet with individuals, we want to find out what resources they already have, what their goals are, what barriers are presenting themselves. And then we work as a team to find resources and also connect to resources, because finding them is an important step, but connecting is sometimes very challenging as well. So the program itself is offered through a grant from the PA Department of Health, and it's available for up to 6 months for an individual to work with Resource Navigator, and families are very much welcome and to participate in that process as well. We very much like to work with individual and a family member, because having 2 sets of ears and 2 sets of eyes can really help the process along.
Yeah, and at Hope Survives, a big part of our mission and vision statement, even as an organization, is about how brain injury doesn't just affect the person who had the injury, but also everyone around them. And so it's been very important for us to have programs for families and for couples navigating it, as well as different family members. We have siblings, children of adult survivors, parents of adult children with brain injury, all sorts of different family members and even close friends that will engage with our programs because of that. And so the workshop that you are doing for us is called Family Communication Strategies, Repairing Communication Breakdown. And so today I wanted to dive into that topic a little bit. And I know that those who listen to our podcast, we have individuals with brain injuries, and we also have their family members who are listening. So as we're chatting, we want to make sure that we address both sides of this, because communication takes more than one person, right? It takes both. And so can we just start with, what are the basics? How would you define communication breakdown?
So communication breakdown is basically, it's a roadblock. That communication is a two-way street of both giving a message and receiving a message. And breakdown is actually a natural part of communication. It does occur for everyone. And that breakdown can be on the side of the person who's delivering the message. That can be things like speaking too quickly, speaking using vague language that can result in communication breakdown, or switching topics too quickly that can result in communication breakdown on the part of the speaker. There's some unique aspects of communication breakdown if you're living with acquired brain injury that involve things like tone of voice, facial expression. Sometimes after a brain injury, the muscles of the face may be affected and people may not have the same range of facial expression. And it's important to keep in mind that communication is more than just words. It's facial expression, body language, tone of voice. And so if in fact the speaker is a person with a brain injury and their communication, those aspects of communication have been impaired because of the injury, the way that they say something may not match how they feel about what they're saying. Or they may sound angry when they're really not angry, but it's difficulty for them controlling their loudness. On the side of people who are listeners, if the person living with the brain injury has difficulty reading facial expressions, sometimes that happens after a brain injury as well, they may not really recognize that the person that they're talking to is not following what they're saying, or that maybe this isn't the best time to talk to this person because they're looking either very frustrated or they're in a hurry or there's aspects of communication that have to do with body language and facial expression that are sort of unique to communication breakdown when one of the communication partners is living with acquired brain injury. That's sort of like the basic aspects of communication breakdown. I hope that sort of
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thank you for explaining that, and especially the intricacies of how it happens with brain injury, because we also know that every brain injury is different and everyone's experience is different and everyone's symptoms are different and every day is different. So, where you could communicate well on Monday, you may not be able to communicate the same on Tuesday. And we have a group called Hope for Couples, and every single meeting we're talking about communication because I think for couples without navigating brain injury, communication is a challenge. It can be a challenge. And so when you add a brain injury to the mix and you add the variability of levels of tiredness or what else is going on or recovering from overstimulation or whatever it is, there could be one day where maybe one person is communicating well and another day where they're not. And so it can be very challenging to navigate these things. So I would love to ask you, what are some practical ways that you would explain communication breakdown happening within a family setting?
one of the practical things is to sort of be very open in discussing what are the communication challenges. Um, some people can be sort of reluctant to say, can you repeat that? Uh, Even people with something if they're experiencing, for example, a hearing loss, whether they've ever had a brain injury or not, some people with hearing loss are reluctant to admit that they need to hear things again. And so they may end up agreeing to something they don't know what they're agreeing to, which can certainly lead to a communication breakdown. So an open communication about what are the strategies that sort of level the playing field is very important. Another important factor is recognizing that time is a very important factor in communication. So we're in a society that is very sped up. Things happen very quickly. And it's important to sort of think about the fact that it may be important to decide on what are the times that you're going to communicate. If there's a lot of background noise going on, that may not be the best time to communicate. If it's a topic that's very emotional, again, you may want to decide how to introduce that topic. Sort of a couple of basic tenets that I like to share and strategies, if you will, and to acknowledge that no strategy works all the time and no strategy works for everyone. So I like to sort of share a variety of strategies and encourage people to sort of see what works for them. A couple of basic strategies, if you are in a conversation and it's an emotional topic or it's a topic that may be sort of hard, sort of what's termed a difficult conversation, is to introduce the topic by, number one, asking the individual if it's a good time to talk and seeing if the individual acknowledges that it is. The other, I think, major difference between having a conversation if you're living with a brain injury versus when you're not is just the amount of energy and effort it requires for some people to process what's being heard. And because of that, what can happen, and I'm not saying it happens for everyone, but what can happen is that the individual who is listening is spending a lot of energy and effort processing what's being said. And because of that, not thinking about who's delivering the message and why they're delivering it. It can sometimes be helpful to start by saying, do you mind if I give you some feedback because I have your best interest at heart? I'm not trying to assign blame, but it's just something I wonder what your thoughts are about this, because it's a concern to me. That slows down a conversation, because it's a lot of words to say before you actually start the conversation. For some people, that doesn't work, because the person may say, no, I don't want to talk about that. And so you have to respect that and say, well, maybe another time. Unless, of course, it's something where the person's safety is at risk, and then you really don't have you can't wait. But that idea of setting the context for why the conversation is taking place, that also plays into memory. If it's somebody that you don't know very well, you may not really have a good sense of who this person is that's giving you this feedback. So that can be a very helpful strategy to set the tone of delivering a message that can be difficult to hear. Another basic strategy is what we call communication alerters, like calling attention to, if somebody's involved in doing something, get the person's attention before you start to deliver the message, and give them time to sort of switch their focus to you. It can also be helpful to really watch the person's eyes as you're in conversation with them, especially if people have word finding problems while they're communicating. If you can see that the person is actively searching for a word, and you can sort of tell that by the eyes. If they're either sort of looking up, or if their eyes look very engaged, they're probably actively searching, and to offer help at that point may interrupt the search. If the person asks for help, certainly, or if there's been a long pause and it seems like it's really getting frustrating, ask if it's okay can you guess the word, or I think you're telling me this. That sort of information can be a helpful strategy as well. In terms of the person who is living with brain injury, their strategies are to let people know what are their strengths. It's like, if I need help asking for a word, I'll ask you. Please don't give me the help unless I ask for it.
Well, that's hard to learn how to even advocate for yourself, because for some people, it's even admitting that they need help, and that can be challenging.
And I'm a big fan of humor. So I'm whatever people feel. I often say my ears don't work as fast as they used to. Can I trouble you to slow down a little bit? It is in that fact of advocating for yourself. Our brains are amazing things. They're amazingly resilient, but they also, the sort of problems that can occur, the communication breakdown that can occur in many instances, are not specific to brain injury. And so, for example, every instance of forgetting is not because a person's living with a brain injury. We all forget sometimes. Or every instance of having a word finding problem is not necessarily because of living with a brain injury. So it's important to sort of be gentle with yourself and acknowledge that to yourself that this is really part of communication. Word finding problems, difficulty processing if you're tired, that happens to all of us, but you're more vulnerable to it. It takes less to trigger that kind of fatigue if you are living with a brain injury. So those are the sort of basics strategies.
I love that. And I love the reminder to give yourself grace. I think that is something we talk about consistently, but it can be very challenging, especially on those hard days. Something that often comes up is emotional swings and outbursts. And how do you repair if there's a communication breakdown? And sometimes it can lead to impulsivity. Sometimes it can lead to saying things you didn't mean. No filter. There's a lot of things with brain injury that can be very frustrating and very overwhelming. And so what advice or encouragement would you have for those who feel like they're dealing with that?
Yeah, that's such a great question because it is such a difficult issue that the emotional dysregulation is a factor that is often misunderstood. There's the flip side of the coin is the decreased initiation. The people who don't engage in conversation or they don't really do anything until something sort of gets them started. When it's emotional dysregulation, when a person is really quick to anger, whether it's anger at themselves because they become frustrated or anger at the environment, the most useful strategy that I'm aware of is breathing, and also acknowledging that sometimes just that brief pause can really help the person sort of bring the emotions back under control. If you're the family member who's experiencing that dysregulation, it's easier said than done, but if you can almost experience it like I had worked in one clinical setting where I worked with an amazing neuropsychologist who sort of explained it as think of it like a cough or a sneeze. It's just what the system is doing. And you
Mhm.
wouldn't take offense at a cough or a sneeze if you can find a way to think of it like that. But that's not easy when someone is yelling at you, or it's not easy when someone becomes very tearful to sort of not see it as that they're very sad. It is important to acknowledge that it's if to the degree that the individual can say, I'm crying, but I'm not really sad. This is just what my system does. That can certainly be helpful to a listener.
Mhm.
If that's not possible, or if that level of introspection is sometimes something that the brain has difficulty with as well, if the family member can say, You do seem really sad right now. Are you sad?" And that can seem like that's an obvious question if someone is crying, but it may cause them to reflect a minute, "Well, am I really sad right now?" Or,
Mhm.
You sound angry. Are you really angry right now?" And to be aware that human nature is if someone is yelling at you, you're gonna wanna yell back, and that only escalates things. So the quieter you can respond, the more likely the person will also be able to get under control. But it's very
Mhm.
challenging, and that is certainly often a very important target in therapy as well, and especially if you can have a family member in therapy with the individual, to have those conversations. Conversational coaching in terms of speech therapy is more and more prevalent, which is nice to see that there's very much a push in the field of speech language pathology toward functional communication. And conversational coaching is something that can really translate to being useful outside of the therapy session. If it starts in a therapy session and maybe goes with, okay, go home and have a conversation about X, Y, or Z for 15 minutes, and then let's come back and talk about how it went.
Yeah, that's all great advice. When you were talking about reflecting on, am I really sad? Am I not? Sometimes it's hard to distinguish that. But I remember at one point in my recovery starting to recognize sometimes I would yell and then I would be like, "Wait, I'm not really that upset." Or I would just, like, start to cry, and then I'd be like, "I'm not really that sad." But sometimes I did feel that sad, And so it's
Mhm,
like, especially, like, you add hormones in the mix, a whole thing we don't have time for. But,
mhm,
figuring out, like, in that moment, really what's going on, and
mhm,
I think what you were explaining was curiosity, right? Like asking questions and for
mm,
yourself, the person who has the brain injury, maybe asking yourself questions about how do I feel? What am I trying to express? And then for the other person, asking questions to the injured individual. And then the person with the injury asking questions of your loved one because communication is a two-way street. We want to understand them well too. It's like, it's not only getting it out, but it's also receiving and making sure that you understand what your loved one is saying. Like I am recently married and with my husband, we've had to learn a lot about communication as just being two humans that are learning to live together for the first time and learning how to communicate what's important to us, having different upbringings, what does our life look like together. And so I love that you encourage like asking of those questions
mhm.
because that's just such a important part of any healthy relationship.
And I think that's a great way to put it. I'd never heard it, but you're right in terms of being curious. That's a great way to do that. And and also learning about yourself. That we talk about communication being it requires two people. The exception I would make is if you are talking to yourself. And I'm a great believer in self-talk. I my thing is, as long as you don't argue with yourself, it's okay to talk to yourself. Because and oftentimes, and I can't remember where I heard this, there was someone who was talking about communication in general, and the point the person was making was sometimes it's very helpful if you let your listener know up front, I'm telling you this not because I'm asking for advice, but because I just want to, having to put it into words makes me think about it at a deeper level. So I'm asking you to be a sounding board and just listen versus I'm having this conversation because I really want to know what your opinion of this is. A light bulb went off for me when that person said that, because my reflex is often if somebody starts to talk about something that's concerning of them, I want to jump in and talk about possible solutions. And that's sometimes just the wrong thing to do. I'm not really somebody, someone once said to me, I'm really not asking for a solution. I'm asking you to listen, which the other aspect is really active listening is a very important skill to acquire. And active
Mhm.
listening means really listening to the person,
Mhm.
not interrupting what they're saying, not offering advice if it's not asked for.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the things that we've talked about in our couples group, one of the couples gave advice that what they do is they actually keep a journal where they write down bullet points of the conversations they've had to help with their memory and also to make sure that they're understanding each other correctly. They will write it down and keep it in this journal that they can go back to. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to do that, to be intentional with your communication, especially navigating something that's so emotionally charged, like brain injury, to be able to say,
Mhm.
hey, like this is what we talked about, look back at it, and to be able to maintain some sort of healthy relationship while navigating all of these challenges. It's hard.
Yeah.
And we didn't even have time. We're gonna have to wrap up here soon, but we didn't even have time to go into, like siblings and parents and, all the different friends, all the different relationships. But as the basics, I really appreciate you sharing about communication breakdown and what it is, why it happens, and some strategies to help. And so, is there any other final points you wanted to share on this topic?
Well, first of all, I really thank you for inviting me to do the podcast, because communication, it's like they say, fish don't see water. Communication is just everywhere and you can't really see it happening. So it's important to be able to talk about it. Two things that I want to echo, how important and how helpful journaling can be. The other 2 points that I wanted to close with is the idea of, if you look how many people take out their cell phones when they're having a conversation these days. I don't know how we did therapy without cell phones, actually, but if you're involved in doing something that you enjoy doing, if take a picture of it, and then it serves as an anchor point if you want to have a conversation about it, because you can bring up the phone and have the picture, and you automatically have a context for what you're going to talk about. And the picture can also jog your memory, what you might want to say about that. The other thing, and this is just because I'm such a word person, if anybody tries this and you find it helpful, please let me know, because I don't usually get feedback about it. But the word remember, when you're asking someone to remember something, if you form the question, and this, do you remember? If somebody asks me, do you remember? I immediately feel challenged. It's like, are, I have to remember that right now. And it doesn't actually, whereas the phrase, can you bring into mind? The act of remembering is bringing something into mind. And so you're laying the foundation for what it is you're asking the person to do. Remember is too vague a word.
And it can be triggering for those with memory loss.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's
if
great.
anybody listening to this wants to let us, respond to, yeah, that worked for me, or now that was useless, I really would love to know.
Sure. We always say here at the podcast, email us hi@hopesurvives.org if you have any further questions for Roberta or any thoughts on this episode. We always love to hear from you. So, Roberta, as we close, we always ask our podcast guests, what are your final words of hope for our listeners?
It's to really savor each victory. Journal them if that's helpful, but don't lose sight of it's a journey of 1,000 steps, but it starts, and each step brings you closer. We don't know what the end point is for any of our journeys, but to really savor the small victories and don't diminish them.
Well said. Thank you so much for being here, Roberta. We're so grateful to have had your expertise, and thanks for being part of Hope Survives.
Well, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, we would love if you would consider leaving us a rating or a review. We are so grateful to be able to provide this support for the brain injury community. And if you would like to get connected, please visit hopesurvives.org.